Joining me now, our Democratic strategist, Steve McMahon, our friend, and another friend, NBC correspondent covering the Democratic race. That would be Kristen Welker. Kristen, you're over there in the NBC bureau in Washington, across town from me. I want to start with you. You've been with Hillary Clinton a lot during this nomination fight. The math now is pretty daunting for Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton knows that. Bernie Sanders knows that. How annoyed is the Clinton campaign starting to get with the idea that Bernie Sanders might stay in this race and cause her problems and spend a lot of money she doesn't want to spend over the next few weeks, maybe a couple months?
Well, I think there is some concern. They're obviously very anxious to start to pivot to the general election in a real way. Obviously, we've seen her start to do that on the campaign trail. Particularly last night, she came after Donald Trump with some of her sharpest attacks yet. She said, we need a commander-in-chief who will defend us, not embarrass us. Having said that, the campaign is jubilant today because they pulled off that clean sweep last night. They weren't expecting it, John. And so this is getting them much closer to being able to pivot to the general election for two reasons. One, you have the optics of it. This makes her look like a much stronger frontrunner. And then you have the math, the bottom line. She has a huge delegate lead over Senator Sanders. She has 2 times what Barack Obama had over her back in 2008 at some of his strongest moments. So they're feeling very confident. They're focused on locking up the nomination. And to your point, I think that they are anxious to do that so that they can start to pivot to the general election. But they're thinking it's going to happen now more quickly than before last night.
All right, Steve, let me ask you this question. What happened last night? Mark and I tried to answer this before, but in your judgment, Bernie Sanders won this big upset in Michigan that gave him hope in Ohio, Illinois, Missouri. He lost everything last night. What's the explanation for that?
Well, I think what happened is Secretary Clinton sort of righted herself on this whole conversation about trade. You know, Bernie Sanders had the core of his argument, which was you're getting screwed, and it's Wall Street and the rich people who are taking all the money that you should have. He moved that in Michigan to an argument really against these trade deals that are costing us manufacturing and jobs all across the country, which really worked in Michigan. Hillary Clinton saw the power of that trade message, and she is a fast learner, and she applied those lessons, and that's, I think, what accounted for it. She did not allow her position on trade to be mischaracterized, they would say, and she you know, picked up her game.
Right. Kristen, what do you think their attitude is towards these upcoming states, which we've been talking about? A lot of caucuses, and in some states that might be more welcoming ground for Bernie Sanders. What's their attitude towards whether they need to just keep winning or they can afford some losses?
They feel like they can afford some losses. They're looking at Arizona, for example. Senator Sanders has already been spending big in that state. Secretary Clinton out with her first Spanish-language television ad there. Candidly, they think that Arizona's going to be tough. They think those other caucus states, Arizona's primary, they think some of the caucus states that they're facing are going to be tough as well. That's obviously a format that favors Senator Sanders. What they're focused on, they want to win the delegate-rich states, like California, like New York. She's going to be in Connecticut in the coming days. So they want to keep their losses to a minimum. There's no doubt about that. But they anticipate that Senator Sanders is going to have some wins. I want to just add one more note to what Steve was saying. I think what you're also seeing is the Democratic base being energized in a way that we haven't seen. And I think part of that has to do with this Stop Trump movement. I've been talking to voters, Democrats, and they say, look, we have to stop him. And part of that is by electing Hillary Clinton now and then being really energized in the general election. Potentially, we could see the Obama coalition more energized than we've seen them in this primary. I think that's going to be the real question mark as we head into the general.
Steve, the Sanders campaign dealt for several days with the being called dead by the media. Then Michigan happened. If you're inside the Sanders campaign now and Senator Sanders says to you, Steve, I need to change the narrative. I need people to think I'm alive. Is there anything short of winning contests, caucuses and primaries, that they can do to change that narrative back to, if not thriving, at least alive?
Well, I mean, they can do things like raise money online, which they do very, very well. And, you know, we used to do a lot of things in the Dean campaign to suggest momentum when sometimes there wasn't as much momentum as we were suggesting. The big rallies and the huge crowds, which he continues to draw, you know, give a sense of a candidacy that's very much alive. You know, the delegate count is the thing that's got to be depressing for those guys. They've been in these campaigns for a long time. They've done this before, and they know the math is almost impossible at this point. So the question really is, how does Bernie Sanders stay motivated and stay enthusiastic when he knows the chances of winning are, you know, between slim and none at this point?
Kristen, real quick, do you think there's going to come a point where the Clinton campaign is going to be more explicit than it's been so far in asking Senator Sanders to step aside for the sake of party unity and for the ability to focus, as she wants to, as you indicated, focus on Donald Trump.
I don't think we're going to see that from the campaign. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to hear that from some of her surrogates. If the campaign starts to take that tactic, they run the risk of really alienating some of Senator Sanders' supporters. They think it's critical to give him the space, quite frankly, that she was given back in 2008 to take it to the convention if that's what he thinks is necessary. John.
Right, it's a tricky thing, right? Thanks, Kristen. It's a tricky thing to do this, but the Obama campaign made a slight mistake in 2008. It was one of the few mistakes they made. They kind of called on her to drop out, and it ended up alienating her supporters a lot.
That's right, and ironically, Hillary Clinton learned from that experience, too. She's running the Obama campaign. It's a delegate campaign. They're racing for delegates, and they don't care if Bernie Sanders wins one here or there. Their eye is on the prize.
Right, all right. Kristen, Welker, Steve, you are great, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.